That should be it. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. My name is Andy. I'm the clinical lead here at ReadyCare. What we're going to do this evening, guys, is talk about something I did a podcast on a couple of weeks ago. I think it might have been last week. That was just really, really popular. I was talking about cholesterol. It's our biggest view, actually, since we started the channel. Now, it was only measured in the hundreds, but at the same time, good to see a strong response to it. So this is something you'll hear a lot from people who are less informed or less up to date on the literature. They'll say things like, oh, well, eggs might give you high cholesterol. And even the idea that we should lower our total cholesterol in the first place, or LDL cholesterol, has been brought into question massively over the last couple of years. So my background is in health science. I want to jump into the science and see what exactly does the literature say. So I've been spending a lot of time putting through developing a course, CPD course, continuous professional development for doctors and healthcare practitioners around what does the evidence say for cholesterol. So I want to dive into that today, and let's do that. Okay, first of all, just looking at the background. So the old school idea was cholesterol is a bad thing. It's not. And that, you know, the more cholesterol you eat, the more your arteries will clog up. The more red meat, cream and butter you eat, they're just going to automatically clog up your arteries, which is madness because they're foods we've evolved to eat for 2.4 odd million years. How could they suddenly start trying to kill us, but only in the late 70s and only in Western countries, because it doesn't happen in remote tribes who eat their body weight in meat and cholesterol and so on. But more recent literature has shown actually that in terms of improving your heart health, low carb is far superior to low fat. So just to give you a bit of faith in terms of the advice I'm giving, it'll be totally counterintuitive, but we have studied this stuff really, really deeply over the last number of years and have a lot of clinical experience in terms of what happens, all of the cardiometabolic parameters, which is a really fancy way of saying stuff that you measure in your blood that gives you an indication of risk of heart disease. So on this type of a diet I'm going to talk about, which is a diet that's higher, relatively higher in saturated fats and protein and lower in processed carbohydrate, although it doesn't have to be high in saturated fats, it just tends to be. These are the results we see. 48% of people will put their diabetes in remission in about 8 weeks. Blood sugar levels way down, weight down about a stone or 6 kgs in old money. Waist down, blood pressure way down, triglycerides, which are fats in your liver, way down. All eating foods that we were kind of told to avoid in terms of the public health messaging for the last 30 or so years. These are some of the awards we won. Again, just to give you confidence in what we're talking about. The Paul Dudley White International Scholar Award is from the American Heart Association, given to one paper in the country every year. And the Clinical Pharmacy Congress Award, which is in 2021 for work that we did in the UK. So onto the science. So, and I'll just jump back on camera for this for a second. So the rhetoric that we need to put into context, or we need to understand to get a better picture of where I'm going with this sort of talk around saturated fat and cholesterol, was basically since the late 70s formulated on the back of a hypothesis. Literally, it's called the lipid heart hypothesis to this day. Lipid heart hypothesis, also referred to as the cholesterol hypothesis, stated that if you eat dietary cholesterol, it might cause cholesterol to build up in your arteries, as if that's how simple the human body is. It's like saying if you drink water, you'll be full of water. But anyway, if you eat dietary cholesterol in eggs, meat, cheese, butter, cream, that cholesterol will then go on to clog up your arteries, and that might be the root cause of heart disease. Now, we know that to be nothing short of a myth. It certainly doesn't bear out when we look at the objective empirical clinical literature. So we've gone from saturated fat is bad, cut down on your fat, cut down on your calories, and eat as much as you want once it's low calorie and you can control yourself, which as a national and even international eating strategy in Western societies has failed us miserably. 70% of some countries in Western societies are overweight or obese. Canada and the USA, for example. Ireland and the UK, not far behind, actually, about 65%. Somewhere upwards of kind of 30% of the population are either pre-diabetic or diabetic. We are a metabolic mess, to say the least. So that's where we've come from, just to give a bit of context to it. And then along comes research like this that says if we reevaluate the old school literature that said, well, it might increase your risk of heart disease, and really get right down into the what did the longitudinal studies say. This is one from the Sydney Diet Heart Study that looked to reduce saturated fat in an attempt to prove, now remember, this is really important, to prove that saturated fat was bad for you. This study found out that reducing saturated fat in the diet, so that's butter, cream, cheese, red meat, all that sort of stuff. If you reduce that in the diet and replace the saturated fat with polyunsaturated fats, which are like vegetable oils, canola oil, sunflower oil, it increased the risk of death in the study population by 62%. So that one didn't work out exactly how they wanted it to. This is the reevaluation of something known as the Minnesota coronary experiment. And if we look here again, available evidence from the randomized control trials show that replacing saturated fats, again, animal fats in the diet, with linoleic acid, which is a vegetable oil, does lower your cholesterol. This is important, but does not support the hypothesis that this translates to a lower risk of death from coronary heart disease or all causes. So this is really important. So I'm just going to read it again. So the available evidence from RCTs, randomized control trials, shows that replacing saturated fat with vegetable oils does lower your cholesterol. So your cholesterol might go from 6 to 4, but that does not confer a reduced risk of cardiovascular disease. So that's saying two things. Reducing saturated fat in the diet did lower your cholesterol, but it didn't reduce your risk of cardiovascular disease. So what two things it's saying? One, saturated fat is not bad for heart health at all, as is evident by all of this research we're seeing in the last few years in particular. And two, lowering your total cholesterol does not confer a reduced risk of cardiovascular disease. So that's quite interesting as well. So findings from the Minnesota coronary experiment add to growing evidence that incomplete publication, so basically hiding studies, has contributed to the overestimation of replacing saturated fats with vegetable oils. So basically, cutting down on saturated fats and using vegetable oils instead is not helping. This is the Women's Health Initiative. The Women's Health Initiative, just to put it into context, was the largest publicly funded study of all time, 720 million it cost. They tracked women over 40 years. And what that found was that women in the low fat, I'll just basically translate the wordy stuff here, or the kind of sciencey looking stuff here, because they intentionally make this look harder to make out for people who aren't used to reading these papers, because they often don't want them to know the true results. So basically, the variability for HR hazard ratio for the women with heart disease at baseline was 1.26, which basically means when they put women on a low fat diet, it increased the risk of a second heart attack by 26%, not the other way around. Now, this one is really one of my favorite papers over the last while, and it's widely ignored in the general kind of the kind of stratosphere out there, or you just don't hear about it all that much, which is incredible because it puts to bed the idea that saturated fat is bad for your heart. So the idea or the premise of saying that saturated fat is bad for your heart lies around the fact that saturated fat increases LDL, and it does. Butter, cream, and cheese do increase in many people your LDL, and LDL was painted out as this bad guy. So with your cholesterol, you have total cholesterol, you have HDL, commonly referred to as good cholesterol, triglycerides, which are fats in your liver, in your blood, sorry, and then LDL, which was previously referred to as bad cholesterol, still is referred to as bad cholesterol by many people incorrectly. So this paper found high LDL cholesterol, remember, this is the one that 99% of your doctors will say is bad cholesterol, is inversely associated with mortality in most people over 60. That means the higher your bad cholesterol, the longer you will live. Now, if you have a look here, second last line, since elderly people with high bad cholesterol live as long or longer than those with low LDL, our analysis provides reason to question the validity of the cholesterol hypothesis. So what that's saying is that our analysis, and remember, this is a huge meta-analysis done. I think there was over 60,000 participants in the study over a 30 or 40 year period. Again, real longitudinal, robust kind of piece of work. They're saying that our evidence should make us question the validity of the cholesterol heart hypothesis, which was you eat too much saturated fat, you eat too much cholesterol, clogs up your arteries and you die. Not evident from the literature at all whatsoever. It's almost like Mother Nature is not a psychopath. It's almost like the foods that we've evolved to eat for 2.4 million years are not suddenly trying to kill us. And it's almost like we've blamed saturated fat and cholesterol for what the processed food industry was feeding us. Almost. So speaking of saturated fat, this is the largest ever meta-analysis. And if you're not familiar with the kind of silly words we use in these research papers, meta-analysis just means if you have trials, then you have studies, then you have randomized control trials. RCTs, whenever you hear that, just means that they took a group of 1,000 people, put 500 in each group, randomly assigned, and then one group was put on a low-fat diet, the other group was put on a high-fat diet. So they're randomized control trials. Um, so a meta-analysis then is a step above that. It's where you look at all of the randomized control trials and you do a really large analysis. The largest ever meta-analysis on saturated fats, so animal fats, again, buttercream, cheese, red meats, and heart health, found, by the way, this was the American College of Cardiology were behind this publication. These guys were just hugely, they were a bastion for anti-saturated fat propaganda. They were saying saturated fat is awful, clogs up your arteries, avoid it, eat little or no meat. They've done a complete 180 and said the meta-analysis of the studies have showed that there's no significant evidence for concluding that dietary saturated fat increases your risk of cardiovascular disease. And this is bearing up in all the guidelines as well now, where they're saying the American Heart Association have now said, actually, eat as much cholesterol as you want, and high saturated fat diets are not bad for you. So again, it's almost like nature had a plan. And this makes sense. Apologies for the text. This happens sometimes with the streaming software I use. So if saturated fat and red meat are bad for us, and if eggs are bad for us, and cream and cheese, what's going on with these guys? Why are they not getting heart disease? Why are they not getting cancer? Why are they not obese? Why are they not awfully sick like we were told we'd be if we ate these foods? They eat red meat, internal organs, and fat. This is the Canadian Inuit tribe. There's a Russian Inuit tribe. There's lots of them. And also, you'll also see this in the Maasai tribe, Massai, in Northern Africa. So they eat almost exclusively red meat, butter. They drink blood, all sorts of horrible stuff. But they don't have any heart disease. They have little or no heart disease compared to the Western world. And then we're all over here doing our bit, saying, you know, we better stay away from that red meat and eat less eggs and low-fat milk, low-fat butter, low-fat cheese. And I feel so genuinely so sorry for people when I see, I'd be doing the shopping with my wife and kids, and I'd see a well-meaning, well-intentioned mum and dad who are both overweight with two overweight kids, and they'd have a trolley full of low-fat milk, low-fat cheese, low-fat butter, and then the Cocoa Pops and breads and cereals and rice and pasta, the stuff that we know now is driving obesity, heart disease, and diabetes. That is what 40 years of misguided public health messaging will do, and food guidelines will do. You know, so that's the mess we're in, unfortunately. So to take a step back, I just want to cover briefly, and I won't keep you too long, but maybe another 5 or 10 minutes. Just want to cover what is cholesterol. So cholesterol is not something that's in your body that evolved over 2.4 million years to do its best to kill you. That's not the idea of cholesterol. So this is, you know, we think cholesterol is bad. And I remember somebody, I can't remember who it was, but somebody asked me 4 or 5 years ago, I was doing a seminar on this sort of stuff. And they said, well, I'd love to get my cholesterol to 0. And I said, I can help you do that, but there's going to be a slight problem. It'll kill you. If you didn't have cholesterol, you would die instantly. Every cell in your body needs cholesterol to survive. Every single cell in your body needs cholesterol. Now, the idea that cholesterol is a bad thing because it's found in the arteries when it's trying to help a state that's riddled with systemic inflammation is kind of like saying that firefighters are probably causing the fire because every time I arrive on the scene of a fire, I see the firefighters there. Therefore, they're responsible. That's what we did with cholesterol. Cholesterol is at the scene of the crime, so we blamed it for committing the crime when in fact it was trying to help. So cholesterol is a waxy kind of a fat-like substance that can build up in the arteries when there's inflammation, but cholesterol doesn't cause the inflammation. It's an innocent bystander. In fact, if you look at where cholesterol comes from, 75 to 80% of the cholesterol that's in your blood right now is being made by your liver. If you never eat a scrap of dietary cholesterol again, your body will say, you know, cool story, I'm going to make 3,000 milligrams of cholesterol, whether you like it or not. So why would your body make that much cholesterol if it's just a bad thing that's trying to kill us? Well, it's not. So cholesterol is responsible for key functions, not least producing cell membranes and maintaining the membranes. Vitamin D that you get, which is crucial for metabolic health, immune system, everything. is produced when the UVB light from the sun hits your skin. Cholesterol is the precursor for that, that starts to make the vitamin D. It's also a precursor for hormones like progesterone, estrogen, cortisone. You produce bile because of cholesterol. If you fall and cut your knee, cholesterol is involved in the repair, cholesterol, calcium, and ferritin. So it's a repair molecule. Interestingly, you see cholesterol levels going down when you have coronavirus and going back up when you recover. So cholesterol is also involved in fighting off infections. It is crucial. It's critical. It's not a bad thing necessarily. So if you want to look at the accurate predictors of cardiovascular risk of having a heart attack, focus less on total cholesterol and LDL and focus more on HDL cholesterol and triglycerides. Hugely important. Total cholesterol is, you're barking up the wrong tree looking at total cholesterol. You want to get your triglycerides down, which is lower than 1.7, and you want to get your HDL cholesterol up, which is loosely defined as higher than kind of 1.3, but the higher the better. And this is the final nail in the coffin in the kind of demonizing ancient ancestral foods that we've kind of evolved to eat for millions of years, is the systematic review and meta-analysis of cohort studies looking at the link between red meat and cancer, which, I mean, I've been of the belief for a long time that things that come from nature, generally speaking, unprocessed foods that come from nature are not trying to kill us, which concluded that the possible absolute effects of red and processed meat, so that's your hams and things like that as well, red and processed meat consumption on cancer mortality and incidence are very small, and the certainty of evidence is low to very low, which is, again, another fancy way of saying red meat is not causing cancer. So what is causing cancer? This is a really, really good paper that looked at, it followed a couple of thousand middle-aged men who had had a heart attack, and it checked all their bloods every kind of so often, we'll say every 6 months or every year. And they wanted to see, is there anything obvious? Is it high cholesterol? Is it high bad cholesterol? What is it that's causing the risk of heart disease? So blood pressure, if your blood pressure was up high, it doubled your risk for a heart attack. Now, interestingly, high total cholesterol did not increase your risk of a second heart attack. It didn't matter if your cholesterol was 4 or if it was 10. It didn't increase your risk of a heart attack. Nor did having high LDL cholesterol, high so-called bad cholesterol. It did not increase your risk of a heart attack. So you wonder then, why has the main focus been on lowering cholesterol levels with statins for the last 30 or 40 years? And that's a whole nother topic, the whole, do statins actually prevent heart disease? But for the moment, it's not an area I want to go to, because it's a bit controversial, to say the least. But what I will say is, what I do know for sure is that total cholesterol being above 5 did not increase your risk for heart attack. LDL cholesterol being above 3 or 4 did not increase your risk. What did? Having blood pressure doubled your risk for heart attack. Having high insulin, so high blood sugar levels causes high insulin, conferred a 6.7-fold increased risk of your chance of having a heart attack in that 40-year period. So that's the elephant in the room that for the most part, most people aren't talking about. Processed food like breads, cereals, granola bars, frozen pizzas, cakes, that's what drives heart disease much more than dietary cholesterol. So again, back to the same old stuff. Food as nature intended. If you're religious, as God intended. Meat, fish, cheese, full fat, green vegetables, dairy, butter, avocados, eggs, all that sort of stuff. And avoid the stuff that we always talk about, the fizzy drinks, cakes, pastries, starchy foods, bland, beige, grey kind of color foods, and you'll be good. Okay, so I'm just going to go to a question here because I think it's an interesting question. So from Charlie. Hi, Charlie. So I had a quadruple bypass surgery in 2006 as my arteries were blocked. If it wasn't from eating high-fat food, what was it? Hyperglycemia, Charlie, more likely than anything. So hyperglycemia means high blood sugar levels. So the reason we get confused about this and we think that eating fat causes fat to build up in your arteries is because if you cut open the artery of someone who needed a quadruple bypass or had blocked arteries, it's full of fat. It builds up with plaques. But the plaques are not the same thing as dietary fat. And the buildup of plaque comes from something known as oxidative stress and systemic inflammation. And that inflammation in the arteries, the little nicks in the arteries, the cuts that cause the plaque to come and try and help the situation, and they end up getting clogged up. are not caused by dietary fat. They're caused by high blood sugar levels for the most part. Now, they can be caused by stress, smoking, very high alcohol intake, all that sort of stuff. But certainly the main driver of cardiovascular disease appears to be, from the literature, high blood sugar levels, not dietary cholesterol. So again, if you open up the arteries of 100 people in remote tribes around the world, you'll almost never see plaque buildup. Almost never. Tiny, tiny amounts, which is, naturally occurring with age, compared to what you'll see if you open up the arteries of your average 40-year-old here who's eating a high-carb diet or a processed food diet. Okay, I'll leave it at that for the moment. So, guys, a couple of people had text me or email me just saying, where's the link? We don't always send out the link. So what you can do, if you want to get notified while you're looking at this video now, if you look on your phone, if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see that there's two buttons. One will say subscribe. You're probably already subscribed. If you're not, click that. And the button on this side will be a little bell icon. If you click the bell icon, it gets these little dots around, these little lines around it to say that your bell notification is on. And then every time I go live, you'll see a notification on your phone. And you'll just be able to click on the notification and it'll open up. It's a much easier way of doing it. So that's handy if you can do that. So listen, guys, have a good evening. I will be back next week. I must do some more patient interviews because we have some phenomenal results coming through. And have a good evening. Thanks for your time. We appreciate you being with me. And subscribe and like this video if you don't mind. Click the little like button down below as well. Take care, guys. See you soon.